Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us on another weekly walk. My name is Carla, and I'm a guide with the Central Park Conservancy. So thank you for joining us again. Of course, we come to you every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time with a weekly walk through Central Park. And on today's weekly walk, we will be celebrating a birthday. And even though, yes, I know it's Frederick Law Olmsted's birthday today, also, we are going to be celebrating William Shakespeare's birthday today instead for a little change of pace. And before we get started, just to review our Zoom controls. So as always, you can use the Zoom features along the bottom toolbar of Zoom. If you'd like to say hello and comment, you can use the chat feature. And a reminder that you can also turn off the previews of folks' chat comments by clicking the little arrow and unchecking show chat previews if you don't wish to see that. And if you have any questions during our weekly walk today, please use the Q&A feature. And my colleagues Desiree is on the back end, and Juan may also be on the back end with us today to answer your questions. And as always, our mission here at the Central Park Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. And I hope we can do that a little bit today on our walk with you. So as I mentioned, we will today be celebrating Shakespeare's birthday and not Frederick Law Olmsted's birthday, which is also today, because really we're celebrating him every day in the park, I think. So today we are celebrating William Shakespeare, and his actual date of birth is not necessarily known, but it's believed that he was born and he also died in the same week of April. And this was also the week, I believe, he is believed to have been baptized. So this tends to be the week that folks celebrate his birthday, and that's what we're going to do today. And to celebrate his birthday, we are going to visit two of the more iconic spots in the park dealing with Shakespeare. We'll make our way west from East 79th Street to the Shakespeare Garden, of course, and take a quick little look at the Delacorte Theater. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, we're going to enter here at East 79th Street. And really, it already looks like spring in Central Park. We can really see that, and all the colors and the blue sky and the green buds coming out on the trees. And about spring, Shakespeare wrote, "Contrast makes appreciation like little frosts that sometimes threat the spring, to add a more rejoicing to the prime." Having to do with feeling those contrasts make you sort of appreciate spring even more. And we've definitely been experiencing some contrasts this spring with a few days that were in, the real feel was about 80 degrees or so. And then we had that a couple dips into much lower temperatures, like on Monday evening, we had a threat of frost. So we're definitely feeling some of those contrasts. But it makes us appreciate those perfect spring days all the more, with a little bit of sunshine and a cool breeze, not too hot, not too cold. And welcoming us as soon as we get into the park is a little floral appetizer before we make our way all the way to Shakespeare Garden, are these beautiful pink and white tulips. But let's keep making our way further into the park. And it's really, this is just a perfect spring day. It's the kind of day you really want to lay out and enjoy a picnic or maybe take a nice nap. But we won't be doing that on this particular lawn because this lawn is taking a little nap itself. This is a lawn which is being restored right now by the Central Park Conservancy, allowing it to come back from all that heavy usage on so many perfect days when folks are picnicking and enjoying those lawns. And you can really see the benefit of allowing a lawn to come back and be restored, because look at how green and lush this lawn is. But since we can't lay out and take a nap or have a picnic, let's keep making our way through the park towards the garden. And we'll make our way up this hill. And very carefully, we'll cross the drive. And a little more uphill. And as we make our way west towards Belvedere Castle, of course, here we're passing by King Yagewo, the King Yagewo statue. Now, Shakespeare wrote a lot of historical plays and various plays featuring kings like King Lear and King Richard and many others. He didn't write a play about King Yagewo. However, this area was the site of a socially distanced performance of, I believe, As You Like It during 2020, when folks were not performing Shakespeare in the Delacorte at that moment. And that was by a troupe called the Idle Playthings in 2020. But we'll keep moving. And as we make our way towards Shakespeare Garden, there's so many sights of spring that we can appreciate, like these really pinky purple buds of the eastern redbud tree, which is native to our area. And you may not know this, but the eastern redbud is actually in the pea family, Fabaceae, same as our honey locust and black locust trees. And so similarly, these trees in the fall will produce a kind of bean pod fruit in the fall, just like our other locust trees do. But right now, of course, all that these trees are producing are some really lovely views of the park, like these pink branches falling in front of the castle as we approach it. Now, Belvedere Castle looks like the perfect setting for a historical or drama of Shakespeare's, but of course there was no King Belvedere, so there is no Shakespearean play about King Belvedere. Belvedere just means beautiful view. And there are many beautiful views from the plaza of Belvedere Castle. I know Desiree shared some with us a couple of weeks ago. And here, what we're going to be taking a couple of views of is some peaks of Delacorte Theater itself, which we can just sort of see in the distance there. And here we can see a little bit more. And of course, Delacorte Theater is where Shakespeare in the Park happens every summer here in Central Park. Now here we see Delacorte Theater in 1964, and this was a production of Hamlet here. But Shakespeare in the Park actually started before the existence of Delacorte Theater in Central Park. Shakespeare in the Park started in 1954 with Joseph Paporofsky, known as Joe Papp, and he first staged productions in East River Park. And then in 1957, he started to stage productions in Central Park. They actually performed on the lawn near Turtle Pond. And of course, Robert Moses was the Parks Commissioner at this time. And supposedly, Robert Moses was a big fan of Shakespeare. I guess that sort of makes sense if you think about all the big, powerful, dramatic people in Shakespeare's plays. And Robert Moses was okay with the Shakespeare in the Park productions and the fact that they were free productions that didn't charge an admission to see them. He was okay with that as long as Joe Papp wasn't actually trying to somehow secretly make money off of these free shows, which he was not. And initially, Papp received excellent rave reviews, even though he was working with a really tiny budget for his productions and working with very young, sometimes relatively inexperienced actors. Now here we see Joe Papp before the Delacorte Theater as it is being constructed. And we all know about Robert Moses, how powerful he was, and I'm sure we all have some different opinions about him and a lot of the work that he did. But Moses actually initially seemed to really admire Joe Papp because Joe Papp himself was a pretty powerful figure that really commanded excellence and a lot of hard work out of his actors and his crews. But while Moses appreciated Joe Papp did not seem to really get along well with a gentleman known as Mustache. His name was Stuart Constable. I didn't have any clear pictures to share with him, but I guess you can guess why he was called Mustache. He had a very large mustache. But he was the executive officer of the Parks Department, and he did not like Joe Papp. He believed that Joe Papp was a communist, and even though he believed he was a communist, he still thought somehow Joe Papp was trying to profit off of these free productions of Shakespeare in the park. And so to try to drive him out of Central Park, he tried to sort of smear him in the press. Joe Papp had appeared before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, and he refused to name any names of folks that he believed he had worked with who may have been communists. And Stuart Constable believed that this would really smear Joe Papp and ruin him, and they would be able to force him out of Central Park. But it turned out that many folks were huge fans of Joe Papp, even Eleanor Roosevelt herself. And while Mustache and Moses tried to assert that Joe Papp, his productions were destroying the lawn of Turtle Pond and that he would have to pay for the maintenance of that lawn in order to continue to stage his productions. And of course, there was no way for a free production to raise that money. They couldn't prove that they'd be able to raise that money to pay those maintenance costs. And they tried very hard to sort of push him out of the park. But the press was on Joe Papp's side. And eventually, surprisingly, Moses had to admit that he was not able to force Joe Papp out of the park. There was a lot of pressure from the public to keep the productions going, including support from Mayor Robert Wagner at that time. And so they had to give in and to continue to stage the productions of Shakespeare in the park. And the very first production that they did that summer was Julius Caesar, which Joe Papp said was because it was all about power. And here's a great scene of an audience in Central Park watching a production somewhere between 1957 and 1960. And you might be wondering if he was almost forced out of this really important element of his career, if he was almost forced out of Central Park, why didn't Joe Papp just charge admissions in order to keep doing what he loved doing and thought was so important? And it was because he felt it was really important to provide free access to these productions, that it was an element of democracy, just like having access to books at the free public library. And Joe Papp believed that as a child, perhaps he wouldn't have had the love of Shakespeare that he had if he hadn't had access to books for free at his local Brooklyn Public Library where he grew up. And I think that these ideas are really in keeping with the sort of democratic, lofty ideals of Central Park's original designers, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. But we still haven't made our way into the garden, and we want to make sure we leave ourselves some time to appreciate that. So let's keep moving. And we'll make our way down the path. And finally, we see the first glimpse of some of the Shakespeare Garden plantings, a few bright tulips popping up over there. So let's make our way over to this little seating area. And here we see, of course, the Charles B. Stover Whispering Bench or Memorial Bench. And here we can see the dedication a little more clearly. So Charles B. Stover is perhaps most well known for his work in playgrounds. However, this bench is perfectly placed right next to Shakespeare Garden due to Stover's love of Shakespeare. And the Shakespeare Garden was actually first created on this site in 1912 by Dr. Edmund Bronk Southwick, who was the entomologist for the New York City Parks Department. And he wanted it to be a place for school children to learn about natural history and plants and probably also insects and pollinators. And at the time, this area was called the Garden of the Heart. But Southwick himself was also an avid Shakespeare fan, so he included in the plantings 4 large beds of flowers and plants that were mentioned in Shakespeare's works. And the garden became a little more focused in 1916 on Shakespeare, probably in part because of celebrations around the tricentennial of Shakespeare's death, which again is roughly around the same time, same date, not the same year, same date as his birthday. So the Shakespeare Garden was dedicated and officially named on April 23rd, 1916. And at this time, the New York Times was running special editions celebrating Shakespeare's tercentenary. And this is also when World War I is breaking out in Europe. And some have argued that perhaps the US was sort of interested in reminding itself of its cultural ties to Europe while it was considering entering the war itself. But on a peaceful note, more peaceful note, let's take a seat on the Charles Stover bench and appreciate the view here. And since we've already been talking a little bit about Shakespeare, this might be a good time to launch our poll. So you can think about which Shakespeare character you most identify with. And I know this one is a little more wordy, but whether you associate yourself, if you relate to Hamlet, perhaps you're kind of a princely person. Oh, I see it cuts off your text, which makes it a little tricky. I don't know if you folks can see that. There we go. That makes it a little bit easier. So maybe you're Hamlet, you're usually pretty princely, but sometimes you get a little bit moody and vengeful, or maybe you're Juliet, you love a good balcony and you just live and die for romance. Or Othello, a brave and powerful person, but also prone to jealousy. Or are you Lady Macbeth? You know what you want and you know how to convince others to help you get it, but you've also been known to sleepwalk at times. And then, of course, there's Touchstone, who is the class clown or court jester, if you will. So we'll give you a little more time to participate in that poll. I know that's going to take you a little more time to read those long descriptions. And perhaps you've never thought of which Shakespeare character you are. And if there's another Shakespeare character that you've always connected with, feel free to mention it in the chat. I couldn't include everyone, obviously. But if we have any King Lears or King Richards or Julius Caesars out there, you can make yourselves known in the chat for sure. And it does look like Juliet is winning, which I'm slightly surprised by. All right, but let's make our way into the garden. And right away, we're really invited to come into the garden and keep exploring around this winding path here. And at our feet, greeting us, we have these little blue forget-me-nots. And also by our feet, and purple, are these charming little primroses. Now, Shakespeare first used the phrase primrose path in Hamlet, which essentially means the primrose path means taking the easy and pleasurable path. And the idea that this ends in ruin while taking the more difficult and unpleasant path in life is what will lead to salvation. And he refers to this idea again in the play Macbeth. Now, luckily, we did walk uphill at one point during our walk today. Otherwise, considering the easy and pleasurable path that our walk is taking today, I'm a little bit worried about our salvation. I think we'll be okay. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and see how you guys chose. It looks like most of you identify with Juliet, but a close second, we have quite a few folks relating to Hamlet, and also I'm not surprised that we have a large group that identifies with Touchstone, who is the sort of class clown and witty and clever character. So I invite you to seek those characters out and read up those Shakespeare plays that feature those characters, or perhaps watch out for the productions in Shakespeare in the Park. And also continuing on our purple theme here, we have this beautiful blue-purple pansy. The pansy flower also appears throughout Shakespeare's work, similar to the primroses. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Oberon and Puck create a love potion out of pansy juice. And in Hamlet, a distressed Ophelia hands out pansies to those around her. As this plaque reminds us, she says, there's rosemary, that's for remembrance. Rosemary has the association that it helps with memory and mental clarity. She says, pray you love, remember. And there is pansies, that's for thoughts. The idea being the name for pansies comes from the French pense, meaning to think. Now, Shakespeare grew up in rural Warwickshire at Stratford-upon-Avon, and this was a rural countryside that would have been filled with wildflowers that Shakespeare would have been familiar with, including violets and pansies, as well as cowslips. And this line from The Tempest, where the bee sucks, there suck I, in the cowslip's bell I lie. Now, if it sounds a little funny for a character to say that they're going to lie in a cowslip, this line was delivered by Ariel in The Tempest, and Ariel is a spirit, so she can certainly fit inside of a cowslip. And just ahead of us here on the path are some beautiful red-orange cowslips. And they are kind of bell-shaped, so you can imagine a little spirit or sprite being able to lie inside the flower, but we don't see any bees sucking at any nectar here. And we'll continue making our way down the path with this gentleman ahead of us reading something. Is he studying up on his Shakespeare? I don't think so. I think he's just consulting a Central Park map. And turning, we catch a beautiful view of the Shakespeare Garden in all of its spring glory and the many, many visitors who come to appreciate these views. Let's catch a few more before we have to end today. And this line from As You Like It mentions the holly. This is from a song in As You Like It. In As You Like It, the setting is a forest, so it makes sense that they would mention a tree. And right above us is this gorgeous holly tree, giving us some shade. And here we also have some nice kind of shadier, more woodsy plantings here that would have fit right into that wooded forest setting of As You Like It, including these really gorgeous, captivating painted ferns. And we'll keep making our way through the garden and around these winding paths. And here is a bee. So even though it wasn't in the cowslip, we see this gorgeous peachy orange color of flowering quince, and a bee is enjoying the nectar here in the quince. And quinces have a long literary history, possibly really being the apple that was intended in the Garden of Eden, the golden apple that Paris awards Venus. And the Greeks associated the quince with weddings and with fertility. And for Shakespeare, the quince appears for one, in Romeo and Juliet, when the nurse is helping Juliet prepare for her wedding to Paris. She says that they call for dates and quinces in the pastry, because again, the quinces are associated with fertility and with weddings. And as beautiful as they are, there's a lot more for us to discover before we end our walk today. So let's keep making our way down these sunny paths, and let's appreciate these bleeding hearts. This is one of my favorites, not probably mentioned in any of Shakespeare's works. These are native to Korea, and they weren't introduced to the UK until after Shakespeare's lifetime, but they really have a very dramatic name, Bleeding Hearts. So I think Shakespeare would appreciate that they're here in his namesake garden. But let's keep moving. Another bench with a beautiful view that we can take a little seat and enjoy, giving us a view of the tulips as well as the Swedish cottage, which has its own dramatic productions, of course, featuring marionettes. And another couple views of these really beautiful tulip plantings. If you're in New York and you haven't come yet to see the tulips in Shakespeare Garden, I highly encourage that you do while they're in all their glory. But let's make our way down the path and enjoy a couple more beautiful views of these flowers and Shakespeare Garden in that spring sunshine. And get a little closer, we can just kind of pretend we've laid down in the tulips here. which would be really pleasant, but we do ask that you not do that. You leave the lying in the flowers to the bees and the butterflies to protect the plantings. But we can get right in there. And one nice thing about tulips is they really show you the details of flower structure, with the female pistil of the flower in the center, sticky to receive the pollen, and the male anthers covered in pollen all around it. I'm sure that the entomologist who thought of creating Shakespeare Garden would be very happy about us studying the structure of the flower here, as that was its first intention. But let's keep making our way down the path and catch a few interesting looking tulips with their fringed edges. And more beautiful spring colors with azaleas also in bloom here. And we can't leave without taking another little view of Delacorte Theater just around the bend here. Of course, some more tulips. This is their time. And these very interesting kind of narrow petaled tulips. And another glimpse of Delacorte Theater. Now we're a little early, so there's no tickets for sale just yet. Things won't be starting up until June for Shakespeare in the Park. But it's important to point out that the production this summer will actually be Hamlet. So I know Hamlet came up quite a bit, so you now know a lot of the floral and botanical references in Hamlet. And for those of you who identified with Hamlet as a character, you may want to check that out this summer. But since that won't be coming up for a while, you've got some time. But thank you so much to everyone who joined us on this walk as we made our way west from East 79th Street and took a couple looks at Delacorte Theater and talked about its history and some beautiful views in Shakespeare Garden, which is really in a beautiful time to see all of the plantings that are there. So many bright colors. So come and appreciate it if you can. And also something to appreciate. So while we can't enjoy Shakespeare in the Park just yet, coming up this Monday, we have a virtual tour. So for those of you who can only join us virtually, you may be interested in attending Who Built Central Park, a special virtual tour this Monday, May 1st at 2 p.m. So one of my colleagues will go ahead and drop the link for that in the chat so you can think about checking that out. But as always, thank you so much for joining us on this walk, and thank you for helping me to celebrate Shakespeare today. I'm sure Frederick Law Olmsted would not be angry or jealous that we wished happy birthday to William Shakespeare, but of course we also say happy birthday to Frederick Law Olmsted and celebrate him every day. But thank you so much for joining us again on this weekly walk, and a reminder that you can connect with us on all kinds of social media and contact us there as well. And without further ado, although parting is such sweet sorrow, as Shakespeare said, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your continued support. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. And until then, from everyone here at Central Park Conservancy, stay safe and be well. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.